evening. Tonight's topic is more important than ever. We need to talk to our children early and often about race, inclusion, and the value of diversity. For many of us, these conversations are not easy, and we don't know where to start. And that's why we're here tonight, to help give you a starting point for talking with your children or other children about race. One amazing Erie resident, Alicia Graves, is behind this wonderful series we are about to kick off tonight. Alicia brought this idea to the town, the school districts, and the NAACP Boulder County branch. Together, we brought her idea to a reality. Alicia was involved in the Being Better Neighbors March, the creation of Erie's Police Task Force, the creation of the Erie's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI Advisory Board, and placing DE&I committees within Erie schools. She is a member of the Professional Standards Review Panel and also serves as the chair of the Education Committee of the NAACP Boulder County branch. She has lived in Erie for 5 years with her husband and 2 young boys. And with that, please welcome Alicia Graves.
Thank you, Mayor Carroll. My name is Alicia Graves. I am an Erie mom and chair of the NAACP Boulder County Education Committee. Before we begin, I would like to first thank the sponsors of this event, the NAACP Boulder County branch, St. Vrain Valley and Boulder Valley School Districts, and the town of Erie for hosting the Speaker Series. And thank you all for being here this evening. I'd like to start by sharing a story about why it is so important that our community comes together to begin this dialogue about race. My oldest son, Kellen, is in preschool. When we recently began in-person learning, I, like most of you, worried about the increased risk of COVID. But more than COVID, I was afraid of what kids would do and say to him as a child in a school with less than a dozen Black students. The reason I felt so afraid, especially this year, is that I was unable to enter the building with him. Last year, as I would walk into his classroom, I'd notice white children stop and stare at him. Before COVID, I could walk with him and shield him from their stares. Now I am not able to leave the car. My protection ends in the parking lot. I have seen kids who don't want to sit next to him or share their toys or run away when he comes near. I've watched a child refuse to touch him because they thought his brown skin was dirty. A week after going back to school, his preschool teacher told me he'd made a new friend. She told me about the little girl who approached him, introduced herself, and asked to be best friends. Every morning, as his teacher pulls him from my car, I watch this little girl reach her arms out for my son. I rarely see them apart. She is constantly by his side. She is the shield I am not able to be. I later learned that her family had already introduced the concept of race to their children. It was not a coincidence that their daughter was comfortable befriending my son. He wasn't new to her because her family had already talked about race with their children. What I hope you gain from my story and these conversations is that our children are learning about race and forming biases at an early age. Who else besides you do you want to teach your children about race and racism? If we aren't talking with our children, we have no voice in shaping their understanding. Do you want your children to be a shield or the reason someone doesn't want to be their beautiful selves? Our speaker for this series is Dr. Rosemarie Allen. Dr. Allen earned her BA from California State University, Long Beach, her Master's of Education from Lesley University, and her doctorate in Equity and Leadership in Education at the University of Colorado, Denver. She is currently an associate professor in the School of Education at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Dr. Allen has served as the director of the Division of Early Learning and in Youth Corrections with the Colorado Department of Human Services. Dr. Allen also serves as the president and CEO for the Institute of Racial Equity and Excellence, which is the lead agency for ensuring equity in educational practices throughout the nation. She is a national expert on implicit bias and culturally responsive practices, speaking at conferences across the country. We are honored to have you with us for this series, Dr. Allen. Please join me in welcoming our speaker this evening.
Hello, everyone. Okay. I think the third time's a charm. I am so happy to see you, and I am super, super excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen in a little bit, but I just want to tell you what to expect. And first, I just like to establish guidelines because these are sensitive conversations, and you can see and hear and feel Alicia's emotions just now. This can be a very emotional conversation. And I just want to say that in this space, with all 161 of us together, this is a safe space. There's no blaming or shaming. This is a place where we give people the space and opportunity to grow. Where you are in these conversations are okay. But once we know better, we're charged with the awesome responsibility of doing better. So can we agree that this is a really safe space? And as we have conversations about race, have any of you ever attended like a racial equity training and you've walked away feeling wounded? Like, ugh, this isn't that type of training at all. This is a Rosemarieism. We live in a racially structured society, and none of us created it. I was talking to a guy once, and he said, "You know, Rosemarie, I've never, ever in my life owned a slave." And I said, "That is awesome, because I've never, ever in my life been one." You didn't own a slave, and I've never been one, but somehow we've inherited all of the residual impacts of it. And we have a responsibility to do something about it. So none of us caused this mess we're in, but we do have a responsibility to do something about it. And this is a safe space to begin those conversations. And also, this is not a passive talk. I'm not going to just sit here and talk at you. I want feedback. I want to talk. I want to see this chat box jumping. I will answer questions as I go along. I plan for some small group time, but I don't think we're going to have time for it. But I may ask questions, and I just want you to respond in the chat box. I'm going to ask you to reflect, and I'm going to do something that's very seldom done, and that's give you time to do it. So many times we say, think about it. Now, what do you think? Without the few seconds that it takes to really think. So are you ready? I want you to buckle your seatbelts because we are about to take a ride. Oh, but before that, I think I should share my screen. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
You can not yet. Okay, where are you? Alrighty, let's try that again. Oh, okay. How's that?
Perfect.
That's perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to start with implicit bias. I am a teacher by nature, so I'd like to just talk about definitions. Implicit bias. Why do we need to talk about this? Because even though we believe in our hearts that we see and treat people as equals, what we know is that hidden biases, unconscious biases, impact how we perceive and treat people. Implicit bias is an unconscious mental process, and it results in feelings and attitudes about people based on how we perceive them as different from us. It can be about race, age, height, appearance, gender, just any ways that you perceive people as different. And it's an unconscious process that has developed over the entire course of our lifetimes, from the time you were born and probably even in utero, that you have developed these attitudes about people, about things, about experiences. So I just want you to think about your body and think about your core. You know, that area right in here. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. But imagine right there in your core that there's a recording device. And on this recording device is everything you ever experienced in your lifetime. Everything you heard, everything you smelled, everything you touched, every experience you ever had from birth is recorded on your inner recording. And the problem is you don't know what's there. And that's where implicit bias lives. So for instance, let's just say your mom had you in her arms at 4 months old, and she parked on the street, and she has you in her arms, and she gets you out of the car seat, turns around to start walking towards the house, and all of a sudden a big giant brown dog runs up. This dog looks vicious, it's showing its teeth, it's barking loudly. Your mom pulls you tight. She's screaming, the dog is barking, she's kicking, everybody's screaming. It's just a really chaotic situation, very, very scary. And she's holding you exceptionally tight. That happened at 4 months old. Now let's fast forward to 34 years old. 34 years old, you're walking down the street, and all of a sudden, an unleashed big brown dog starts running towards you. And all of a sudden, you are terrified. You start screaming, you start running, you are terrified of this dog. And you don't know why. You'd never had a bad experience with the dog. What's the problem? It could be that experience at 4 months that was recorded on your internal recording is now driving what you're feeling at 34. You see how that works? So we don't know what's on those recordings, but they really, really, really drive how we feel and think about people. Implicit bias also supports stereotypes. So I want you to pay particular attention to this yellow bullet. Unconscious attitudes are less egalitarian than we explicitly think about race. And what this is saying is that we all believe we're better than this. We do. We believe we're better than this because we want to be. You wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't want to address this whole idea about race and talking to children about race. We believe we're better. It's hard to believe that we are all biased. And our refusal to talk about and confront issues of race, issues of implicit bias, actually reinforces it. Now, I said here that implicit bias is this mental process that can result in how we feel about people based on race, age, and a lot of other things. I do want to say today, we're talking about implicit racial bias. And sometimes people say, Rosemarie, it's not only about race. And they are absolutely right. It is not only about race. However, it is always about race. Always. No matter how you look at your data, no matter how you slice it and dice it, Black and brown children are at the very bottom on every single indicator of well-being. So we must talk about race, and it's important to talk about race and implicit bias so that we can understand the causes of this bias, and then we can do the intentional work that it takes to mitigate the negative consequences. I like to use the ladder of inference to kind of give you a visual of how implicit bias works, what happens, and how we become engaged in it. And some of you may have seen this ladder of inference before, but like any ladder, you climb it from the bottom. You select data from what you observe. And then when you get to that next rung, you add meaning to the data you observe. You add meaning, and the meaning that you add is based on your own cultural and personal experiences. And this is where you start to make stuff up. And then you make assumptions based on the meanings that you made up, based on your cultural and personal meanings. And then you draw conclusions, adopt beliefs about the world, and you take actions based on your beliefs. And you know what? You do this in milliseconds. Do you know that the minute you meet someone, you size them up? You don't even know you're doing it. You size them up immediately, milliseconds. And this process designed, I believe, to help us make meaning of the world and also to keep ourselves safe. But let me give you an example of how this works. My observable data. Rosemarie rushes in, she doesn't speak to me. Did you know speaking is cultural? Some of you on this call, some of you were explicitly taught to speak when you walk in a room. That's the way I was raised. I was taught that when you walk into a room, your job is to speak. On the other hand, some of you were taught that when you walk into a room, it is not your responsibility to make yourself the center of attention. You wait for an opening, you're a little quiet, and you fill the room out. How many of you were raised the way that I was raised, that you speak when you walk into a room? Okay, I see some of you. Yes, yes, you can use the chat box too, since I can't see you all. How many of you were taught to kind of stand back and not make yourself the center of attention? It's really interesting when you watch how people were raised. I can always tell based on how people enter a meeting. Those who are raised like me, they can walk into a meeting 5 minutes late, and instead of tipping in, they still have to speak to people. And then those who were raised to just make themselves smaller and not draw attention, they're looking like, what in the world is she doing? She's already late. Go sit down, will you? It's really incredible. But you can imagine the cultural disconnects that happens just as a result of how you enter a room. So let's play this out using this ladder of inference. So I select data. Rosemarie rushed right past me, and she didn't even bother to speak. I can't believe she did that. And then I'm going to add my own personal and cultural meaning. Oh, you know what? She has an attitude. She didn't even bother to speak. I told you she didn't like me. And then I make assumptions. Oh, she thinks she's better than us. That's why she walked right by here and didn't even speak. And then I draw conclusions. She'll never treat us fairly because she thinks she's better than us. And you can go right up that ladder before you ever know it. And Michael Barla, that's my good friend and colleague, says sometimes it isn't being raised that way, but learning to be that way to not draw attention to ourselves. And that's very, very true. So let's go to the next one. The toddler in the family has a bottle filled with red liquid. I select data. You know what? That child is too big for a bottle. I add meaning and labels. Those parents must be uneducated. I make assumptions. I bet you that drink is sugary and that beverage is not good for the child. And then I draw conclusions and take actions based on my beliefs. Oh, I won't even bother. That family probably won't listen to what I suggest. And maybe they just can't even afford quality food. Maybe they can't afford milk and they put that sugary drink in this bottle. And we go up that ladder very, very, very quickly. I just want you to think about a time that you may have gone up the ladder. Think about times that you've made assumptions about people and a time that you yourself may have gone up the ladder. And think about how implicit bias may have impacted the incident. And while you're reflecting, I am going to take a chance and share with you my most painful experience ever engaging in implicit bias myself. And this happened a few years ago. And I promised myself I would tell this story until my heart stopped racing when I tell it. And it hasn't happened yet. But a few years ago, when my son was at Howard University in Washington, D.C., anyone familiar with Washington, D.C. and Howard? Okay, so when he was there, it wasn't gentrified yet, and it was deemed a very undesirable area. It was very scary for us to allow him to go there because of some of the reputation, some of the things that we'd heard. But he went to school here in Highlands Ranch, one of the few African-American children at his school, and to go to an HBCU, a historical Black college and university, was huge. And we wanted him to have that experience. So he went and had an amazing time and really, really did well. And after his second year, between his sophomore and junior year, he wanted to move off campus. And we were terrified because he was safe right there on campus with the school. And, you know, it's a small campus, everyone knew each other. And all of a sudden he wanted to leave that safety net. And it was very scary for his dad and I. But this kid wasn't having it. He created the most amazing PowerPoint. I believe I have on this Zoom call another HU, we call it HU, Howard University alum. Do I? I think I saw Justin Brooks. Justin, are you an HU alum? Okay, he may have left, but he said not quite. Okay, so he went to Prairie View, so he went to an HBCU. And everyone knows what that is? Historical Black College and University. HBCU, Historical Black College and Universities. There, we have them all over the country, and Howard University is the school where Vice President Kamala Harris attended as well. So anyway, he wanted to live off campus. He showed us his PowerPoint, very excited. He made his case. So of course, we're going to let him move off campus. And once the decision was made, I went into a panic because where will he live? Will he be safe? We didn't want him to have his car because if you've ever driven in Washington, D.C., you understand why you don't want a 20-year-old to have a car there. And I said, okay. So I went into Mama Bear mode, looked for the place, found the perfect house. 5-bedroom, he would share with 4 other graduate students. Now, he wasn't a graduate student, but he's an old soul, and he would do well there. So we set up a meeting for him to meet them, for them to meet him. They fell in love with each other. He's ready to move in, ready to sign the lease, but I wasn't. It's like, not yet. I need to go and look at this place for myself. So I flew to DC. Side story, how many of you work with children? Any teachers here? Special ed? Okay, so how many of you have heard of sensory integration processing disorder? I have that. So does my son, but I have it. So the way that my sensory issues show up is how I get lost. This will make sense in a minute. The way I get lost is I get very lost in space, have no idea where my body is. That proprioceptive type sense, no, I mean, it's physiological. I hyperventilate. I get very disoriented, very lightheaded, and usually I need help to find my way. Thank goodness for GPSs now. That will make sense later. So anyway, I fly into DC, I rent a car, I put the address in my GPS, and I'm driving along and I'm feeling good about this. And I get to his street. And as I get there, I'm about to make a left turn, and I know I'm on the right street because I see the pink house. So I make the turn, there's a pink house, I pull in, and I'm about to park. And right as I'm parking, I looked up, and right next to the pink house was a Black man standing on his porch. A very dark, rather large Black man. And I went straight up the ladder to my shock and horror. My very first thought was, my son can't live here. This area is too dangerous. My second thought was, I hope I can get his dorm room back because he needs to go back into the dorm. And my third thought, remember I said this was milliseconds? My third thought was, what the heck just happened? And it was like this. Even right now, my heart races saying it. I could not believe I did that. Nothing in my mind, body, or soul prepared me for the belief that I could ever do it. I was so shocked and overwhelmed and ashamed and unworthy that I put my hands on the steering wheel, put my head down, and sobbed. Not like he cried, but cry all your makeup off, your false eyelashes, everything, snot nose cry. I cried because I couldn't believe it. My life is dedicated to this work. How did I look at a Black man who literally looked like my husband and decide the area was too dangerous for my Black son? I couldn't believe it. And I'm just crying. I don't know if you've ever had that profound sense of unworthiness and shame. I couldn't believe it. How did this happen? How did this happen? And I'm just crying my eyes out. And I'm so shocked because I love Black men. My dad was the greatest man I knew ever. My brother, my uncles, I was raised by 8 different uncles who loved and supported me. My husband, my brother, right here on my desk, my brother, my son. How did this happen to me? What in the world? Anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm crying. And then I realized I was sitting a long time because I looked up and the man is looking like, what's going on? And when our eyes locked, he saw I was crying. He raced down the stairs, knocked on the window, and I'm like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. What am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? And you know what I wanted to do? I just wanted to drive off. I just wanted to take off. And I thought about it. I said, he doesn't know me. He never met me. I'm in a rental car. I could just leave. But I decided to do what I'm going to encourage each of you to do when it happens to you. Not if, but when it happens to you. And that's do everything you can to face the fear. Whatever that fear is, just face it. So I thought, okay, I need an excuse. I'm getting myself together. He said, ma'am, are you okay? Are you okay? And I wiped my face and I got out. He goes, what's the matter? What's wrong? I said, I think I'm lost. See, because when I get lost, I get really lost because I have sensory integration processing issues and I get all disoriented and I'm just going on and on and on. He goes, ma'am, calm down. I know what sensory processing is. Another bias. You do? And I'm thinking, how would he know that? See how our bias just compounds each other? So finally he goes, well, what's the matter? What address are you looking for? And I told him. He goes, ma'am, and he laughed. He said, you're right here. That's the address. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. But I got myself together and I said, you know, my son's a student at Howard and he's going to be living here. Are you a student at Howard too? He goes, oh, kind of. He said, I'm a resident at the hospital, finishing up medical school. And I'm like, oh, I would have missed that. But you know, Erie, he didn't have to be a future doctor. He could have been a janitor, a faculty member, a Walmart worker. He could have been homeless. But what he should not have been was deemed dangerous simply because he was a Black man standing on his porch. And I did that. I did it. And I've been doing this work for years and I did it. And if I'm capable of doing it, imagine what you're capable of. We do it all the time. And whenever I tell the story, I apologize to every single Black man who's within listening distance, hearing of this. I apologize to you because I know it's your life. I know you're feared everywhere you go. And we have to be aware of how we do that, even when we think we're better than this. We go up that ladder so fast. And I did. And you may be wondering, well, Rosemarie, you talked about this bias and now you're telling me that we're all biased and what am I supposed to do with this? How do I handle this? 2 very simple steps, which is the beginning. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it helps you to notice. Notice and wonder why. Notice and wonder why. Notice when you have that reaction and wonder why you're having it. That can help disrupt the bias in the moment. I'll tell you what could have happened to me if I had not been knee deep in this work. I could have driven down the road. Oh, there's the pink house. Make my left turn, pull up, look around and go, oh, this feels really dangerous. I don't know why. I'm just going to go get his dorm room back and we'll tell him that he can do it, try again next semester, without examining why I was having that reaction. So notice and wonder why. And I want you to think about the times that you've gone up the ladder. Now, I just shared my deep, dark secret with you. I will never, ever pressure you to share. But if there's anyone who'd like to think about a time they've gone up the ladder, please feel free to do so. And again, where you are is okay. But when you know better, then you're expected to do better. Okay, well, keep thinking about it. So, implicit bias. Are you seeing my screen okay now? We form implicit evaluations based on inaccurate information and stereotypes. It makes it hard to live up to our value of equity and fairness. It creates real-world barriers to equity. Implicit biases, they're not aligned with our explicit beliefs because we all think we're better. And implicit bias disrupts your conscious commitment to equity and fairness. I want you to know that aware is halfway there. We're all biased, even you. Even you, and those who think they aren't are actually the most dangerous. The most dangerous. And when we believe we're beyond it, when we believe we're better, when we begin to think that this couldn't possibly happen to me, is when you are the most dangerous on your journey to racial equity, because there's no check and balance systems. You can become closed off to hearing about how others are experiencing you. And when I say aware is halfway there, it is, but it's only halfway. We still have a lot of work to do. And one of the things we have to do is talk about race. We have to be able to talk about these issues. It's uncomfortable. We don't like to. We have become so politically correct that we are afraid. We don't want to offend anybody. We don't know what to say, how to say it, who to say it to. We don't know if we should say Latinx, Latina, Hispanic, Chicano, Black, African American. My own struggle right now is making sure that I understand the terminology of the LGBTQIA+, because I'm afraid of misgendering, which I actually did last Monday. There's a fear there, but we have to work through it. Someone said this just happened a few days ago. They walked into a FedEx they'd never been into. There was a teeny tiny space and I was the only white person. I froze for half a second and felt like I shouldn't be there and almost left. But I paused and I got curious about the tension and sent my dang package and went to my car and cried. Good catch. Notice and wonder why. Someone said, I respect that statement. We're all biased, and when we think we're not, it's a dangerous place. Thank you. I'm glad that it's food for thought. So we become politically correct, and we're afraid. Anybody afraid of offending someone? You don't know what to say? That's really, really natural. And there's a reason for that, because things change. This is a picture of my family right here. Now, see my husband? That big black guy looks so much like the guy standing on the porch. It's just amazing how the brain works. Now, I was born in 1959. 1 month from today, April 1st, I will be 62. My husband is 10 years older, and he will turn 72 this year. Now, my husband was born in the segregated South. And when he was born, let me find the chat box. When he was born, use the chat box for me. What race do you think is listed on his birth certificate? In 1949. Justin, you got it. Colored. My husband is colored. Now, every now and then I'll say, come on over here, big old color boy. I can say that, you can't. It's always good to know what you cannot say. Now, 10 years later, in 1959, when I was born, what do you think I am? What's on my birth certificate? Negro. Yep, I'm Negro. Now, in 1983, when my daughter was born, what do you think is on her birth certificate? Yep, Nina, she's Black. 11 and a half years later, in 1994, what do you think my son is? Now, that's a family living today. No wonder we're confused. We don't know what to say, when to say it. How many of you honestly are afraid to call someone Black? I don't know if I call them Black. Do I call them African American? We are so afraid to talk about race. We're afraid of making a mistake. But you know what? There are other reasons too. Oh, Sarah said other. You know, I did this workshop a couple of weeks ago, and an Indigenous person said her grandmother's race is listed as savage. Really interesting how people label you. But another reason we don't talk about race is because it feels so personal. People are terrified that they're going to be blamed. People are terrified, especially white people, that I'm going to be blamed. They're going to say I'm this and I'm going to be a racist. And then too, for so many whites, you've never had to talk about race. You ever wonder why people of color talk about race so openly? It's because we talk about race every day, all the time in our families. It becomes a protective barrier because we have to prepare our children to live in a racial society. But white skin, that provides a barrier, and you don't have to worry about it as much. So you don't have to talk about it. People of color, BIPOC, does everyone know what BIPOC is? Black, Indigenous people of color, are afraid that they'll be accused of playing the race card. And then people are afraid that people will just get too defensive. Then we want to pretend like it doesn't exist, not polite to discuss that which makes us uncomfortable. Judge said he got chewed out once for using Hispanic instead of Chicano. I'll make you a promise as you are on this equity journey and as you commit to talk about race and addressing equity, I promise you, you will make mistakes. You will. You will offend, but I don't want that to stop you. I just told you that last Monday I misgendered someone. It was so uncomfortable, and it's going to happen. And when I did it, I sent the person a private chat. I said, I realized I did that. There's no excuses. I apologize. I asked for forgiveness. And I believe that a public infraction requires a public apology, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable. How would you like me to handle it? I'm more than willing to do this publicly. And they said, I want you to do it publicly so that other people can learn. And it was a beautiful way to model it. It was a beautiful way to acknowledge, to model, to ask for forgiveness publicly, to be publicly forgiven. And we keep it moving. We're going to make mistakes, but don't let that stop you from engaging in this work. One of the things I want you to be careful of is to not engage in colorblind ideology. I got ahead of myself. But just in the chat box, tell me, were you taught to be colorblind? We're not going to get to everything, but if you were taught to be colorblind and if you're comfortable talking about race. And when you get a chance, read Tabitha's comment as well. So yes, people were taught to be colorblind, some not to be taught. Yes, never acknowledge it. We're all the same. Taught not to talk about it. I am comfortable, definitely taught to see color. So we're pretty much all over the board, but what I'm seeing here more are themes that some people are comfortable, but lots of people grew up to be colorblind. I don't see color, I just see people, lots of you. And I am so glad you're here because this is what we want to undo. Because guess what? People say, I don't see color, I just see people. First, it's not true. And I don't know if kids are on, so I won't call it the other word. It's not true. Each of you who logged in noticed I was a Black woman. You didn't unsee that. You didn't say, what is she? You noticed I was a Black woman when you logged in. And guess what? I want you to notice. Who doesn't want to be seen and honored and embraced for everything that they are? I want you to see me. When we engage in colorblind ideology, issues of equity are avoided. And then it promotes this fallacy that people are beyond bias and racism, and it ignores disparities, and then it blames behaviors on communities of color. So we must talk about race. Now, this is a big ask for you. who were raised to be colorblind. Not only am I asking you to develop a level of comfort talking about race, but you must, if you're going to teach your children to talk about race. My son and I were one of the only Black families at our karate school, and we were testing for our brown belts. And that's the belt right before Black. And I don't know why, there's just a lot more pageantry around brown belts. You're breaking boards and bricks and doing flying side kicks and all kinds of things. So we invited our friends and family to come watch, and in skips a little girl about 3.5, 4. Anybody work with young children that age? You know, a 3.5-year-old, they can't walk, they just skip. They kind of run walk. I taught 3-year-olds for many years. They just can't walk. So she skips and hops in, and she's hopping, and then she goes, whoa, how come there's so many Black people here today? And her mother took her by the mouth and drug her off. And I'm standing here wondering, now how do I handle this? Finally, I went over, hey, Tabitha, I heard that question. And I asked her mom, is it okay if I answer? She goes, Rosemarie, I'm so sorry. I don't know where she got that from. I said, it's not a big deal. She just asked a question, because those of you who worked with 3s or have a 3, they notice everything. Teacher, your breath smells like coffee. Teacher, you got a boogie in your nose. You wore those shoes yesterday. I don't like your hair. How come your teeth look like that? Did you have salad? They notice everything. So she noticed all these Black people here. So I said, do you know why there's so many Black people here today? She went, I said, because Clarence and I are testing for our brown belts, and they came to see us. Brown belt? Cool. And hopped off. That's it. It was a question. But do you see how we create that fear? Imagine a couple of more times of her mother dragging her off by the mouth because she simply asked a question about why somebody looked different. She will learn very quickly, by the time she's 5 or 6, not to ever ask. So you who work with children, have children, responsible for children, whatever brought you here regarding children and race, you have to develop comfort talking about race, which means bring it up in a casual conversation. Bring it up in your cartoons. Ask your children what they think. Notice, oh my goodness, did you see her hair is so curly? Her hair is curly and your hair is straight and her skin is dark. So we'll talk about how you do that, but that means you have to become a lot more comfortable. So we must talk about race. We must talk to children about race. So how do we talk to children about race? As Alicia said, some are afraid the children are too young, and they fear that talking about race promotes racism, and actually the opposite is true. The failure to talk about race is what contributes to racial inequities. So I just want to go through the stages of racial awareness for young children. And I want you to know that it begins in infancy, that babies begin to notice and respond to skin color cues at about 6 months of age, and they prefer the same race caregivers. At birth, babies look equally at the faces of both races. At 3 months, they look more at the faces that match the race of their caregivers. And between 3 and 8 months, children can distinguish facial features of any race. But by 9 months old, they are impacted by something called perceptual narrowing. And this is a decline in their ability to disseminate or recognize distinct facial features of another race. So what does this mean? That while infants are born with this ability to really distinguish those features, over a period of time, they lose that ability. And without exposure, they don't get it back. So by 9 months of age, they were able to discriminate between same race faces, but not between other race faces. Isn't that fascinating? It's so fascinating. And why does this happen? Because of lack of exposure. Lack of exposure to other races lead to perceptual narrowing. Infants begin to disregard what they don't see. They don't see it, they don't need it, they don't use it. And what's really amazing about this, here I go with Another story of me not being perfect. And it's all about growing. I worked in predominantly Black areas most of my life. When I moved here in 1994 and I began to work in Parker, anybody familiar with Parker? Parker, Colorado, Douglas County in 1994, you can imagine how absolute white there is. Judd, you're on it. When I went to work for a child care facility in 1994, all my families, all my moms looked like size 4 white blondes. Can I be honest? I could not tell them apart. I could not tell them apart. Perceptual narrowing. I didn't have enough experience and hadn't developed relationships to tell who's who. I have a friend who adopted a daughter from China. And every year or so, they would have these get-togethers with all the Chinese girls. And she adopted 2 girls from China. And one of the siblings ran up, "Mommy, I can't find my sister. They all look alike." So Judd, you're right. That's where this idea that they all look alike come from. Because if we don't have the experience distinguishing between facial features, I'm not going to ask you to be honest, because I know it's scary to say, yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I've done that. And those of you who are people of color on the Zoom call, you've been a victim of it. 2 Hispanic women, you get them mixed up. I mean, this happened to me with the lieutenant governor not long ago. Hey, and called me another person's name. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I handle this? And I just let it go. And then they realized what happened when the other person got on the call. And we had to talk about it and they apologized. So this perceptual narrowing happens in infancy. And if you don't widen your experiences, as an adult, you still have it. So someone says, last year, I mixed up my new friend's husband, who is Asian, with another Asian man I had just met. I was so embarrassed. My friend said that, "You think they all look alike, huh?" And now we know why. Now we know the science behind it. We have to expand our associations and interactions with people. By the time children are 2 years old, they show a strong preference for same racial groups. And at 2 years old, they're really beginning to become curious about people's characteristics, hair color, skin color, and they may match people based on their physical characteristics. Now remember, these are 2-year-olds. Anybody have a 2-year-old home or that you're working with? They match everything. They match. But when they begin to match skin color because we're so uncomfortable, we stop it. We think, oh, that's wrong. That's so wrong. They can't do that. But it's just part of matching. And we have to talk to infants and toddlers about race. So what do you need to do? Examine everything in your environment to make sure diversity is well represented. Do you have books and photos that represent diversity of race? Do you have staff members and professionals you engage with from different racial groups? Do you model positive ways to talk about skin color and differences? Jessie has dark skin and you have light skin, and both skins are beautiful. Someone said that they get famous people mixed up sometimes. And another person said, I have trouble distinguishing people of other races. So helpful to understand this. I grew up in a very white community. Absolutely. Now we know the science of this. Almost every time I go to an ECE classroom to do observations, a young child notices my brown skin and they tell me. I love having conversations with them about my skin, but it also makes me realize they probably don't have a lot of exposure. Absolutely. And I am so glad that you are having those positive conversations. So next are preschoolers. So preschoolers at this age, they identify and match people according to racial and physical characteristics and groups. But they become very confused about the complexities of race. So Alicia identifies as Black. I identify as Black. Our skin tones are 2 totally different colors. So some children get mixed up. So they can't understand the complexities of colorism and things like that. So be aware of that. But they also absorb stereotypes from society and from other people and the media about other groups. So they may become uncomfortable or show discomfort and fear, much like the story that Alicia shared that happened to her son. They may tease or refuse to play with others because of skin color and language and differences and physical disabilities. I'm from California. I knew just enough Spanish to get by. My son was almost 4, and we went to Multicultural Day at the zoo. Way back then, they would have this day, Multicultural Day, and people were speaking different languages. And I was really surprised that my son was afraid, because I speak a little Spanish at home. And I thought we were exposing him to more diversity. He goes, I can't understand these people. I can't understand these people. And he was just having a fit. So finally, my husband said, son, people speak different languages. And he goes, you know, your mom speaks Spanish. And he goes, oh my goodness, I'll never understand her again. And he just had a meltdown. And it was just shocking that here I thought I was exposing him, and I really wasn't. And even when I would say things like, cierra puerta, or cómete la comida, and just little things like that, because he had heard it his whole life, he didn't realize it was a different language. So sometimes we think we're doing something, but we really have to dig deeper to make sure that we're naming and labeling and talking about it. And someone said it's tricky with our preschool students wearing masks. Absolutely, it's very tricky because they're not able to see each other's features. And someone else's son at 18 months saw a Black man for the first time and started shouting, brown, brown, brown. And I hope that you were comfortable enough to say, yes, his skin is brown. What skin is yours? What color is your skin? I was at the supermarket a year or two ago, and this kid ran ahead of his mom and turned the corner to my aisle. And as he turned, he almost ran into me. And he went, hey, you're Black. And I said, yeah, I am. And you're white and you have blue eyes. Where'd you get those blue eyes? He goes, they're just blue eyes. And I just have blue eyes. I said, I don't. My eyes are brown. And then his mom came. But I was so thankful for just those few seconds that we could have a very authentic, casual conversation about race without his mom being embarrassed about it. So at this age, preschoolers absorb stereotypes from people and from the media, and they may show fear or discomfort towards other groups. They may even refuse or to play with other children because of skin color, and I said that language differences or disabilities. So in order to talk to this age group about race, you have to promote racial identity in a positive way. Families, schools, doctors' offices, wherever you touch the lives of children, and select books that promote diversity and highlight positive role models. We've been on in pandemic mode since last March, so I haven't been to my office to get my books, but I just happen to have some here. And here's one about the shadow and the moon, about a mid-autumn festival for Chinese cultures. I walk with Vanessa, and this is just a book about kindness. It's not about race, but what I love about it is it has a Black girl as the main character, because every book that you use to promote positive racial identity or exposure doesn't have to be about race, but it can show people of different races very positively. And this is a water princess about a little African girl in her village bringing water back. And totally self-promoting is my book on Cute and Curly, and I have another one called Stylish and Straight somewhere around here. It's a little Black girl with curly hair and how her mother washes her hair at the kitchen sink and all the products that she puts on her hair and the rule about not touching her hair. And at nighttime, she wears a satin cap to keep her hair from drying out. And then what I love about my own book, right? But what I love about this book, and I wish others would do it, is in the very back is information in a glossary on terms. What does ashy mean? What does it mean to wear a satin cap? Why do you wash your hair in the kitchen and not in the bathroom? And things like that. Yes, and this is the book. And Alicia, will you put in the chat box for me, lovebeingblack.com? And that's where you can order it. And then here's a book called Grandma's Purse, and just all kinds of books. And again, I just walked over and got them off my bookshelf. You Hold Me Up, and this is a calming book with, it looks like an Asian family. Hush, another book about Asian culture. I think this one is Japanese. Jonathan and His Mommy. Just have a wide variety of books for children. I love this one, Where the Fireflies Dance, because it's in English and in Spanish. If you want to know more about creating an anti-bias environment, I just pulled that off. There's another one called, I can't see it now. Each and Every Child, Equity, I Like Myself. One of my very, very, very favorite is Crown, about a little Black boy who is going to the barbershop to get his hair cut. Another Asian, Huan, Chinese, Sleeping Dragons. And then one of my everything's my favorite, Hair Love. And you all know that this one won an Oscar for short film, but just have a very rich environment. And children, you know, here we are with those 3s and 4s. How come our hair looks like that? How come our hair is spongy? My hair's not spongy. When I read my book, there was a part in there that says, I like my curls, but I don't like when other people touch my curls. And I was reading it to a preschool class, and a mixed race child sat straight up and just stared. And I said, do you have something to say? And she goes, don't touch my hair. Stop touching my hair. And it turned out to be such a wonderful environment for her to be heard and to talk to other children about how she didn't like that. And we'll talk about why in a minute. We also want to emphasize the importance of being different. There's nothing wrong with being different. It's important that we're different, of celebrating differences, saying things like no one looks the same. Each person has their own look. It would be boring if everyone looked the same. And then stress how everyone is different and everyone is important. No one's better than anyone else. No one is better, no matter what our skin color is. So I'm just going back to the chat box, and someone said when they lived in Ghana as a white woman, I was often the first white person that encountered the villages, and the children would scream in terror and run away when she walked throughout the village because they hadn't seen a white person before. Or if they were more curious, they would come up and touch my skin. This helped me so much understand the basic curiosity of kids. How do you balance representation while avoiding tourism? And tourism is just highlighting a culture of the week, Taco Tuesdays and that stuff. You're digging deeper and you're bringing the reality in. It's the use of what we call window books. And I just lost the other one. Window books are the window books and mirror books. Window books, like Hair Love, for example. This book is a window book for white children or any non-Black person, because it allows you to peek through the window to see the culture of others. And it's not, there aren't stereotypes in it. The pictures are realistic, but it's a mirror book for that little Black child in your classroom to see themselves. So that's how you balance that tourism. You think about windows and mirrors. Who is reflected in this book and whose culture is being highlighted and exhibited and celebrated in a very realistic way. And you can also talk to children about how we treat each other and how we want to be treated. Children of this age, preschoolers, they understand fairness. That's not fair. That's not fair. She has more. You know how that is. So talk about how everyone deserves to be treated fairly and how it's important to make sure that people get what they need. Someone had students who purposely put sand in little RJ's hair. And I'm guessing, yes, he was Black. And they were observing how they could see the sand jump around when he rubbed his head. And if you have ever worked with a Black family, what is one of the things they tell you? Don't let my baby play in the sand. I wish I had more time so I could tell you all the rules, but we're going to get there in 1 second. Let me speed up because I'm acting like we have all night and we don't. So we want to be careful when we're talking about this age, talking to this age group about race, that we're promoting empathy and not sympathy. That's critically important. Because if you raise your children to feel sorry for children of color, then that puts them in a position of superiority. But empathize. Is that fair? Does that seem right? Would anybody want to be treated that way? And you can say things like, we all have different skin color, but we're all the same underneath our skin. We have families, we smile, we have white teeth, we eat the same food, we like to play, and it isn't right to treat someone differently because of their skin. But you also have to say, but some people do. And you can create little social justice warriors right in your classrooms and in your homes. What do we do when we see someone being treated unfairly? What do we say? You know, I raised my son to look out for that child who's sitting by themselves at lunchtime when he was a little person. Honey, when you go to school today, watch out for people who are sitting by themselves because they need a friend too. So if you have that child that's naturally very social, reaches out, very playful, and I see a couple right here, I see a little hugger over there, let them know that everybody wants a hug. And if they see somebody who needs a friend, it's up to them to be that friend. So this is what I want you to remember. If you don't talk to children about race, they will create their own reality based on their own limited information. That's very, very, very important. Someone said their 4.5-year-old doesn't talk or ask about others. They're very quiet and introverted, so I don't get the opportunity to respond to comments, thoughts, and we'll have to do the teaching and ask questions intentionally. Absolutely. And someone else is a Latino Arab family, and we try to talk about race and religion as Muslims, sometimes are categorized as terrorists. Yes, and I'm so sorry I don't have the book. And it's a little Muslim girl with a blue hijab on. Oh my goodness, I can't think of the book. Oh, it's gonna drive me crazy. But The Deepest Blue, thank you, thank you, thank you. And that's another one talking about her hijab. I knew that this one teacher was promoting acceptance of all people in her classroom and had a very comfortable classroom for children to talk about differences, because I went in to observe one of my adult students, and this little Muslim girl with a hijab came up to me and she goes, "Hey teacher, hey, you want to know what my favorite song is?" And I said, "Yes, I want to know what your favorite song is." And she said, "Okay, are you ready? Are you ready?" I said, "I'm ready." And she snatched her hijab off and said, "I shake my hair back and forth. I shake my hair back and forth." And she shook her head and then she put it back on. But as she was putting her hijab back on, a little white boy came over and said, "Ooh, your mom told you not to do that again. She said, you better keep your hijab on your head." And I thought, how beautiful was that? That he understood this is what she wears, that her mom told her to stop. I mean, it was just such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful exchange. Someone said, "That's weird. I guess it explains Uncle Joe's propensity to do exactly that." I'm sorry, I missed something. I'm going to have to go back. So, like I said, if you don't talk to children about race, they will come up with their own ways of dealing with it. They will form their own understanding. You will lose your opportunity to guide them. And as children naturally categorize people based on the color of their skin, then they will develop ideas and values by watching you and listening to you for racial cues. And how does that happen? Now, this is what I want you to be aware of. Remember, aware is halfway there. When you go to the supermarket and need help, who do you ask? What's the race of the person you ask? What does your household looks like? Who are your friends? What books do you have? What shows do you watch? Who's in your family? Because children learn very quickly that we're this kind of people and those kind are not allowed. My mommy only talks to this kind, but not that kind. So I want you to be very careful of your own behaviors as you teach your children about race. Because you know what? Bias is learned very early. Here's an example. You have to listen carefully because she has a strong accent.
Where are they gone?
I don't know.
You don't know. So who ate them all?
Someone come round and they just ate them all.
Someone come around and ate the cakes.
Yeah.
So someone broke into a home and ate Mr. Kipling's Angel Slices. Didn't take the TV, didn't take, you know, some jewellery. They took these cakes.
And it was a black man.
Did you hear that? She's saying someone came in and stole our angel food cakes. And we have some children on, so I'm not going to repeat it, but it was did you all hear that? I don't think for a minute that the mother taught her child this, but she certainly missed an opportunity to correct it. Absolutely missed an opportunity. But what messages did this child pick up in the environment to even think that? We don't have time for group time, but I do want you to think about the information on children and talking to children about race so that you can now come up with some strategies for talking about race in your homes and in your classrooms. So, what's happening here? So what we want to do is make sure we limit children's exposure to stereotypes, ensure a very, very diverse environment, create diversity through books, toys, and art, and make sure that we also recognize the culture of each other. Is culture-blind ideology is just as detrimental as colorblind? Be aware of your culture. Everyone has one. We have to recognize the culture that we bring with us. White people must also recognize they have a culture. We made a big mistake in the 80s and 90s when we defined diversity as everything that wasn't white. And it led white people to feel like I didn't have a culture. How many of you think, whoa, I have a culture? What is that? My students have such a hard time when I tell them to define themselves by their culture. But the culture is basically your ways of being, the rules that you abide by. Culture is not just race and ethnicity, but it's how you live in the world, if that makes sense. So when we all see ourselves as cultural beings, then we don't other people. So be aware of your beliefs and perceptions. This is culture. Culture. If you believe that children should be seen and not heard, that they should be respectful. My sister raised her children in Alabama. They say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. To not put a sir or ma'am behind it is considered very, very rude. Some Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, whatever those beliefs and perceptions are. And then your personal identities, who you are, and then your cultural practices. I mean, there are just very simple things like in my family, if my dad called me, and he called me Rose, and he always made it a couple of syllables, Rose. When my dad called, I came. Anybody else raised that way? When an adult calls you, you come. That's part of my culture. I remember when I was in Parker at La Petite Academy, I called one of my 3-year-olds, Connor, and he said, what? I'm like, excuse me? Rude, I thought, because our culture was different. I said, Connor. He went, what? And I thought, surely this boy didn't answer me, what? And I put my hand on my hip and marched right over there to him. Connor. And he looked at me. He goes, what, teacher? You keep calling me. What do you want? And he was as confused as I was. I'm confused because he didn't come, and he's confused because I didn't tell him what to do. You see cultural disconnects? So we have to be aware of who we are culturally, because you know what? We don't know each other. We don't know each other at all. We are more segregated today than we ever were during Brown versus Board of Education. When I moved in Parker, I was pregnant, and 2 of my neighbors were pregnant. We had our babies, we brought our babies out, and when I looked into my white neighbor's arms, her little guy, James, had the bluest eyes I had ever seen. And I said, oh my goodness, his eyes are so blue. And she said, yes. And I think they'll stay. And I'm like, huh? I was so confused. I made an excuse. I went in the house and I told my husband what happened. I said, I complimented her son's eyes and she said she thinks they'll stay. And my husband said, well, what does that mean? I said, I don't know. It's really weird. And she seemed proud. He goes, honey, you misheard her, because where are his eyes going to go? And I said, no, I didn't. She like smiled. She said, I think they'll stay. That's what she said. He goes, babe, get over it. I think you misheard her. You know that feeling that you miss something culturally? And I thought, I'm missing something. It's something I don't know. So I called my friend. I advise you all to have a friend that you can go to ask the questions that you never want to ask anybody else. So I went to Anne Ray. And whenever we have these conversations, I called her. I said, girl, I have a white girl question. And she goes, okay, shoot. And I told her what happened. She goes, Rosemarie, you know all babies are born with blue eyes and then they change. I said, first, all babies are not born with blue eyes. And they change to what? She goes, you don't know this. I said, She said, okay, some babies are born with blue eyes and they change colors. I said, like what? A darker blue? Like deeper blue? She goes, no, honey, they can change to brown. I'm like, so a baby can be born with blue eyes and with no intervention whatsoever? They can just turn brown all by themselves? How does that happen? And I said, do they go to sleep blue and wake up brown? What happens? I was so shocked. And you might think, surely she knows better. How would I know? I never had a white baby. And then she dropped another bomb. She says, the hair changes too. And it was that day that I learned you can be born with blue eyes and blonde hair and end up with brown eyes and brown hair. Who knew? Who knew? I didn't. But there are things you don't know about us. And I see this chat jumping about hair, and we're going to get to that in a minute, so hold on. But we have to be aware of our culture so that we don't have cultural disconnects like me and Connor. Because most children, they don't come to school knowing what teachers expect of them. Do you know we say really ridiculous things that nobody else in the world says? Like sit crisscross applesauce. Do you know a child has no idea what that means? They might go looking for applesauce. They don't know. And then they look around and they learn, but think about how you never ever intentionally teach a child how to say crisscross applesauce. They learn it by observing other children. Most teachers are not aware of the cultural expectations of the child at home. And then this could be the child's very first experience outside of their home, family, and community. And the teacher's expectations may be different from the parents. And it's these cultural disconnects that leads to disciplinary problems. Let me show you a quick video. Please work, please work, please work.
Hey girl. And then I told him, is you crazy? Girl, he tripping, right? Crazy. And can you believe he tried to ask me to get up first to get your breakfast? Girl, he crazy. And girl, guess what? I found some SeaWorld tickets for free for military, girl. We're gonna have to go. Yeah, we're gonna have to go. Yeah, girl, they got water, they got animals. Girl, yes. I'm excited, girl. Yes, he did, girl.
There you go. There, what happened?
Girl, I fell out. Couldn't believe it.
Girl, what?
Girl, I'm trying to tell you.
I'm trying to say.
Ain't he crazy?
You're crazy.
Girl.
Girl. Hey,
Huh? Girl,
girl.
can you believe it?
No.
Me either, girl.
That is perfect.
Girl, tell me about it.
That is perfect.
Huh?
That is perfect.
He tripping, girl.
It's perfect.
Oops, wait, I have to stop that video. Hold on. Oh, where did it go? That's why I needed to stop it.
My mama.
Yes.
And my dad behind us.
And just make sure you unmute yourself then too.
So that is definitely a look into a culture of a child, but this is also a suspension waiting to happen. Little Black girls are only 19% of the preschool population, but 54% of those were suspended. Can you see how brilliant this little girl is? How smart she is? But imagine having her in your classroom of 20. How will we ensure that her sweet spirit is embraced and we can honor who she is? Because I'm guessing she's not quite 2. Anybody here work with 4-year-olds? Imagine her at 4 and you say, okay, it's clean up time. Teacher, you tripping. What? Say what? I'm not ready to clean up. Just imagine, but how do we honor who she is without suspending her for being who she is? And here's little Mateo.
Listen to me. Like I do this all the time. And if I go out at the house with the door, Matthew has his toys, and then Matthew has all his toys.
Okay, but I have to yell at you guys.
Listen.
Okay, what?
Like everything they do at this house, they can't trust everything at Grandma's house.
Okay,
Okay, then what?
then you're not listening to me.
Then you're not listening to me.
How do we honor Mateo? What do you do if your part of your culture is you never talk back to an adult? That you don't tell me to stop talking, you don't interrupt. How do we honor who he is without breaking his spirit? And we have to do this. We have to do this because what we know is that young children, as early as infants, are suspended and expelled from their child care programs. For instance, in Illinois, 40% of child care providers suspended infants and toddlers. Infants and toddlers. How do we define an infant? As a child who has not turned 1. How do we define a toddler? As a child who's not turned 3. These babies are still in diapers. In North Dakota, 20% of programs expelled, meaning they kicked children out. And 53% of them were infants and toddlers. So we have to be aware of our biases and our different cultural expectation and disconnects. I love what Rachel said. She said, we have to stop demanding silence. And how do you suspend an infant? Very good question. 2 main reasons that infants are suspended. Can anyone guess? What's the top 2 reasons? Oh, someone said Cuban kids would play in Colorado school. Biting, yep, biting and crying. But what do babies do? Bite and cry. That's their job at this age, but we're kicking them out of school because of it. And our data tells us that there are racial and gender disparities in suspensions. Boys, we suspend boys, and we suspend boys a lot. They're 54% of our preschool population and 78% of those who are suspended. African-American preschoolers are almost 4 times to be suspended than their white friends, and these are all for the same infractions, except some get to stay and some are asked to leave. This is a startling statistic for me. Some of you may have seen my TED Talk. I talk about being suspended a lot as a child myself, but little Black girls are only 20% of the preschool female population, but 54% of those suspended from school. Anecdotally, we don't have the quantitative research, but anecdotally, there are 2 main reasons that children are suspended, little Black girls are suspended from school. Can anybody guess those 2 reasons? Talking is combined, not specific. Oh my goodness, Tangi, I'm sorry, Tangi. Hair. Little Black girls, thank you, are suspended for their hair. The way they wear their hair, dress code stuff. Absolutely. Now, what you've probably seen in this chat box going crazy is how people touch Black children's hair. Now, if you have a Black woman here, can I tell you the number 1 rule about Black hair? Number 1 rule, don't touch it. Don't touch it. Many Black children, from the time they start school, their parents say, be good, do what the teacher says, work hard, get all A's, and don't let nobody touch your hair. Don't. General rule, don't let anyone touch your hair. I don't know where it comes from. I saw a video, if you want to not Google it, but go to YouTube. It's called The History of Black Hair. and never wet it. Justice is absolutely. So, but in this video, I was so shocked to learn that cornrows were used during slavery. And when people were escaping, the cornrows were a map. You know, you've seen elaborate cornrows, and food was braided into the hair for sustenance. So I thought that was interesting. So maybe that's where the don't touch my hair comes from. But here's another suspension waiting to happen. Now I want you to look at this little girl with her cute little beads and imagine her mom said, don't let nobody touch your hair. You better come back here with those beads intact. And imagine this.
Say cheese. Cheese.
What would happen if that little hand, if that little hand did not pull away?
Say cheese. Cheese.
Just imagine she pushed her away. Who do you think would get in trouble? Especially if the teacher didn't understand the hair rules. I went to a re-entry meeting with a little Black boy who was suspended 3 days because he wouldn't sit in the seat. Very compliant, sweet, calm, spirited child. And when we went in, it took a while to get to the fact that he wouldn't sit in his chair because all the little girls around him kept petting his afro. And he said, I felt like a dog. They kept petting me. Instead of the teacher finding out what was going on and why that was such a problem, she said it's only hair. So now that we all know it's not only hair, this is a general no-no for our culture. Please, please, please be aware of that. So as we only have 3 minutes left, I am going to move forward and quickly tell you some of the strategies to help you talk about race and avoid some of these issues. And it's to practice cultural humility. And to practice cultural humility means that you take yourself out of the role of a teacher or a professional, and you take the time to learn and get to know each family, what their needs, dreams, aspirations are for their children. It's reflected in this assignment that Kyle Schwartz, a 4th grade teacher and DPS, gave her students. She said, I want you to finish this sentence and bring it back to school. And this is what she got back. I wish my teacher knew I don't have a friend to play with me. I wish my teacher knew that sometimes my reading log is not signed because my mom is not around a lot. I wish my teacher knew I don't have pencils at home to do my homework. I wish my teacher knew how much I miss my dad because he got deported to Mexico when I was 3 years old and I haven't seen him in 6 years. I want you to practice not knowing so that you can learn what you need to learn. Don't assume you know families. Don't assume you know what they're going through. Practice not knowing. Ask yourselves, what do you wish your families knew? What do you wish your constituents knew? What do you wish your team members knew? Practice cultural humility so that you can get to know people. Then I want you to work on controlling implicit bias. It requires deprogramming, retraining your brain, accepting and expecting discomfort. Be intentional about expanding your reality. You can't expand your children's reality if you don't expand your own. And how can you do that? You seek out, look for opportunities to positively interact with other racial groups. Social media is a great way right now to get involved with groups that are racially, religiously, and ethnically diverse. Follow diverse people on Twitter and Instagram if you use social media. Share your non-biased, anti-racist beliefs with those in your network. More than anything, stand up. Stand up to biased and racist individuals and make the implicit explicit. Questions? I'm going to take a look at the chat box. And someone said, teach non-Black children that you should not ask. Very important. Not only don't you touch a Black person's hair, you don't ask to touch it either. Snaps to the Crown Act. The Crown Act was passed here in Colorado and in 6 other states that doesn't allow you to discriminate against a person's natural hairstyles and the way it grows out of their head. Oh, Amy says she learned a lot about hair tonight. I'm glad. It's important to teach all children that everyone has a personal space. I've heard not to call them cornrows since they were named reference to slavery. Do you call them braids? I call different styles. I call those that are braided to your head cornrows. I call them braids. What I don't call them ever are French braids because they're not. My son punched a kid on the bus last year for pulling on his hair. He told him several times to stop and the boy didn't. But now as teachers and people who are working with children, you know the importance of helping your children understand why you don't touch other people's hair. Let's practice cultural humility. I see that. How might we follow up with you, or another recommended follow-up on this workshop? Alicia is the person, Alicia Graves. She's setting this up. I am so thankful for her leadership on this. Kathy says, my mixed race niece doesn't like to be called Black, and she refers to herself as Carmel. Let me tell you something. People have a right to name themselves and how they want to be called. So any other questions? We're going a little over. Tomorrow night, we're going to be covering some of this material, but it will be tailored for elementary school. So anything else? I'm going to turn it back over to Alicia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
I don't have anything to say. I wasn't prepared to speak.
You weren't prepared. Okay.
Barely made it through the intro.
Mayor, would you like to close us out?
I didn't have a prepared statement either, but I just want to thank everyone tonight. I don't know what expectations people had, or if any, right? We probably shouldn't have come in with some, but you totally blew away every expectation I had. Dr. Allen, the way you talked, the examples you used, the way you helped us relate to the topics you were talking about, so useful tonight. I know it resonated with me on such a deep level, and I believe it did with so many others on this call. So we are so thankful for you and your teaching, and I know I look forward to the other 3 series that I can't talk tonight, other 3 events that we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. All right, everyone, it's 8 o'clock. I know you've had long days, and then you came and joined us for the last hour and a half. So thank you so much, and go forth and do great things. It's up to you. When you know better, you do better. Take care.